Welcome again, and thank you again for joining this afternoon. I'm enjoying sitting with a with a breeze coming in through the window behind, and but then as we took a couple of minute break, I see an alert of started getting fire alerts now. So I always have to keep that to hand. Um, it's a strange thing to see that already. There's barely a gap, it seems, between winter and then the fire season begins right away. And there's a curious sense of reassurance when you see the fire is a long way away. And yet, for the people that fire is close to, they're not having that reaction. They're not having that reaction, I'm sure. But always there's this rising and falling of the welcome and the unwelcome. Bird song at the window, and then haze in the valley, which I worry is smoke. It's like it all comes together. I've been thinking about the fact of like kind of succession and Dharma transmission a little bit lately. At Yokoji recently, there was we had a week long session, a 7-day retreat where Arthur Kennedy, he became a successor of Tenshin Roshi, and that made it quite a special session. And I've been looking at that fact of lineage and succession, and so in looking for someone to talk about today, or what seemed apt to bring up as a favorite koan of mine. It could be a tough koan to talk about, but I'll see what I can do here. Which is from the time of the Buddha. And I enjoy koan. I like to find koan sometimes from the time of the Buddha that featured the Buddha, because of course with our insight community of the desert, it's not a Zen, it's not a Zen organization. It's founded more in the Vipassana style. But as Zen found a welcome, I found a welcome home at ICD, which I always appreciate through the Tuesday night group, and also just through the connection with the teachers there. And I feel that over the years, our sangha and our community has taken on a certain style or a certain flavor. In Zen, they call that a family style. Like sanghas have a family style, that vary from place to place. I know at a Yokoji there's a family style, or at Long Beach Meditation there's a family style, and for ICD, again, we have our own way. And over the years, I can certainly attest to the fact that ICD has always felt a very warm and welcoming place of practice. That's always been at the center, has been a warmth and an open invitation, and yeah, I think just maybe I can't find the words, but it's always felt good. As simple as that. It's always felt like a very positive community. So thank you for being a part of that for many here for many years, and for some who are quite new, then just know that you made a fine decision in deciding to practice alongside these good people. So with that said, I'll bring up the koan. This is from the Gateless Gate. What a classic Zen title, the Gateless Gate, the gate that has no gate. Okay, and this is case number 6 from the Gateless Gate. The Buddha holds up a flower. So it says that once in ancient times, and we can say that was probably somewhere around 500 BCE. Right, we're not quite sure of the Buddha's lifetime. There's a couple of competing records that both have a competing thesis, but it's probably somewhere around 500 BCE. Once in ancient times, when the world honored one was at Mount Gudrakutra, to give a sermon, he held up a flower and showed it to the assemblage. At this, they all remained silent. Only the venerable Kashyapa broke into a smile. The world-honored one, that's a Buddha, one of the Buddha's titles. The world-honored one said, I have the eye treasury of the true Dharma, the marvelous mind of nirvana, the true form of no form, the subtle gate of the Dharma. It does not depend on letters, being specially transmitted outside all teachings. Now I entrust Mahakasyapa with this. So here we have a collection of monks and nuns, many different people. That it said that the sangha had grown to quite some size at this point, gathered together to hear a Dharma talk by the Buddha, and perhaps they'd been sitting all practitioners and practicing meditation. I looked up earlier some of the principal disciples of the Buddha, because coming from a Zen school, we have a certain lineage, and so certain disciples of the Buddha I'm familiar with because they're known in the texts. But in Theravada and other lineages and Tibetan lineages of Buddhism, for instance, then the key disciples might be different. It said that some of the key ones: Ananda, Mahakasyapa, who's one here, Shariputra, Upali, Mahamoggallana. That's one I can never remember, so I brought that up. Rahula, that was the Buddha's son. Subhuti, Kema, who was a Buddhist nun. Moggallana, Angulimala, Patakara, and we could go on, but those are perhaps the principal ones. And I was doing a little research on these disciples, and some of them have some very colorful characteristics in the Buddhist lineage, right? This one of my favorite here is Moggallana, one of the foremost disciples of the Buddha, had gained supernatural powers. This is quite popular in that era as a product of meditation, to gain supernatural powers. It's said that he could shapeshift, he could fly, and he could see ghosts. So, that's an interesting mix. I mean, shapeshifting, that could be useful, right? I mean, you could see how you could use that. You could get into a lot of trouble with that, but, shapeshifting, okay. Flying, that sounds fun. But, I'm not sure about the seeing ghosts part. That's a part I'd be like, I don't need that as one of my supernatural powers. Just, I'll take the flying maybe, but outside of that, maybe not. So that you read these curious things, but we're looking back into a distant time where it's semi-mythical too. And some of these meetings that are taking place, we don't know about the strict historicity of some of these meetings. I've heard claims of supernatural powers in meditation. I don't know if anyone here has mastered any of these supernatural powers or has gained any of this. If you wish to shape shift or fly or improve any of these things, we could do it now. But I think this experience that we're having is extraordinary enough. The closest I've come to supernatural powers, I would say, is curiously sometimes in session, particularly, or in retreats, when I have the one-on-one meetings, then sometimes it'll happen that I know what the person's going to say, but that could just come out of experience, right? But it's kind of like, what somebody's going to say, and sometimes the koan that they're going to bring up that they're working on, I'll know that that's the koan they're going to bring up. And you could argue that it's like, well, probably I kind of guess or that kind of thing. But sometimes those kind of things, there's a little, I feel like there's a little maybe psychicness that sort of gets activated sometimes in meditation at retreats. That's as far as I'll take that. Mahakasyapa, it said, rather than indulging in supernatural powers, was a master ascetic, right? Which was one of the practice methods that the Buddha had been long involved in, which was the denying yourself things and just practicing strict austerities. I know one of them, the Mahakasyapa one, was for one of never bathing. And that's a practice that some ascetics still do in India and other places to this day. So you can imagine this meeting with the Buddha on Vulture Peak. The Buddha must have, maybe he's like me, like prone to sinus infections and didn't have a very good sense of smell. But having Mahakasyapa close to him as an ascetic, maybe that would have been challenging. Food asceticism was popular in that time as a route toward enlightenment. It was an old tradition where people thought that the more that you could wean the body off what the body depended on, you would weaken the body and strengthen the spirit. That is a very old tradition. And it said that the Buddha had engaged in that for a long time, until such time that he became so weak that he fell into a river trying to get a drink of water and almost drowned, and would have drowned if he hadn't have been saved by Sujata, a lady who was herding cattle nearby, who pulled him from the river and revived him with a little rice and some milk. The Buddha then, of course, he went through a time of confronting extraordinary failure, a time of seeing all of his efforts in asceticism, all of his austerities. He'd mastered certain meditation techniques, and yet he just wasn't satisfied. The question of life and death, the question of impermanence, the goad for the Buddha's practice had just not been satisfied. He hadn't gleaned from his practice efforts the results that would satisfy him. And he finally returned to meditation, but it said return to meditation without aim or without method. Right? So not meditation to achieve something. Meditation, he'd already practiced these methods of meditation to achieve deep concentration, to achieve austerities, to achieve all of these things. And you can imagine the Buddha sort of broken down and having failed in all of his efforts. When he finally sits down under the Bodhi tree, then there's nothing much left to lose at that point. It's already been lost. And it's said that the Buddha said, I will not move from this seat until until enlightenment is achieved, even at the cost of my life. And then it's said that he sat for, well, it differs in the record. In the Zen record, he says he sat for 7 days. And that's why the session, like we just had at Yokoji, is 7 days. That's why retreats are typically 7 days. It tracks that record. And for us here now in the modern world, it kind of tracks nicely. We're taking a week off from work. So that's a nice synchronicity, but you've got a week. You got a week's vacation, so you've got to make the most of it. That's a good goal for a retreat. You only got a week, so you got to get it done. Now, after the Buddha is enlightened, or comes to a great awakening, comes to a very deep realization, it's said that his first thoughts around this were, this cannot be taught. So he remained silent for a long time and just wondered. and was thinking that there is no way to teach this. There is no way to convey the experience of a realization of absolute reality. If we say that that's what if we put that out there as enlightenment is for conscious realization of absolute reality. Say if we're bold and we call it that, the Buddha saw clearly that that could not be taught, because necessarily anything that we put into words is always just a pointer, an approximation, and just directing us towards something. Right? Words have great power. Words offered at the right time in the right place have the power to move empires. So words can certainly be skillfully used. I've been following a series recently on great speeches and reading some of the great speeches down through the centuries, like masters of oratory. Like words can have great power for good and for evil, for good and for bad, right? But words are always pointing towards something, and words always contain bias. Words tend to have an agenda and have some bias. So the Buddha decided he couldn't teach this, but it said in the legendary record that the god Indra said to the Buddha, you can try. And you can imagine the Buddha, in a more practical or down-to-earth sense, after wandering for some time, just thought, well, I got to do something with this. This is useful. This is powerful. And he had come to personal liberation through meditation, and so decided there is a way to put this into, I can't teach ultimate or absolute reality or liberation or enlightenment. However, I could define a path toward it. And he is somebody who had gone down a lot of blind alleys and one-way streets and made a lot of mistakes, so he didn't have to include those things. He could, he could have provided a longer list of don't do this. That would have been the 100-fold path. Right? There's an 8-fold path. He could have done a 100-fold path. Do not do these things. I did them, and it was a disaster, or it didn't work. We could all produce our own, I think, 100-fold path of things not to do that we learn through experience, through cause and effect. But the Buddha, through his own cause and effect, first defined reality as he understood it. The human condition as he understood it, which everyone can relate to the human condition. Not everybody can relate to enlightenment or absolute reality, right? But everybody can relate to the human condition. So he defines the human condition. Life is dukkha. Life is dissatisfactoriness. This dissatisfactoriness is caused by clinging, caused by the desire to things to be different than they are, caused by attachment and aversion. The good news, or we can call that conditioning. The good news, that we can stop, there is an end to that. We can find an end to that desire. We can find an end to that clinging and arrive at liberation, arrive at enlightenment. How do we do that? The Eightfold Path. And then the Buddha delineates out 8 ways of practicing as a human being in order to let go and stop creating unnecessary suffering. And at the cost of voluntary restriction of our desires and the things that we want, to practice precepts and the Eightfold Path a way which will guide us over a long period of time toward ever deepening degrees of realization. And so begins the whole spiritual path or religion or practice of Buddhism. And the Buddha then is reunited with his former disciples who had left him in disgust at his drinking some milk and having some rice and abandoning his asceticism, but recognized in seeing him again that he had become an is extraordinarily present and alive and clearly had something to convey. From there, the community grows. And as the community grows, the Buddha has to then expand on this path and start to put together the Vinaya, the rules of conduct for a community and for practitioners. And there's a lot of them. Because as you get a group of people together, as we well know, problems start to occur, right? The drama begins, the cliques form, the rights and the wrongs, the cool kids and the nerdy types, it all starts to, all of these things. And so he had to bring all of these rules. Now it's said towards the end of his life, or very close to the end of his life, the Buddha said they'd put so many rules together that the Buddha said, after I pass, you can forget the minor rules. Just follow the major rules, the major guidelines. That's a curious thing. I wonder about that. I wonder if a lot of the minor rules were the personal pet peeves of the Buddha. It's like rule number 247. If the trash gets full, take it out, take it to the dumpster, put a new liner in it. That's like, but maybe that was just something that annoyed the Buddha. And he decided, we won't need that after I'm gone. I would have my own rules, where it's very important to, that's one of them. That's right. That's obviously one of them. But after the Buddha had passed, it said that people started to argue about, and they kept the minor rules. It's like whether we get rid of these or whether we don't. You often in spiritual movements, in religions, in ways that we have an extraordinary leader, but when that leader departs, then often it falls into infighting and factions form, and this is just the way of human beings. Now, Mahakasyapa, to come to the koan, had been with the Buddha for a long time, and it said that he was older than the Buddha and one of these key disciples. A couple of the most prominent disciples had since passed. They're quite elderly when this exchange occurs. And so the world honored one, again, that's one of the Buddha's titles. He came to give a sermon or a Dharma talk, and he just holds up a flower. Now, this is where Zen begins in the Zen lineage. It begins at this exact point. Long before Bodhidharma in China, the Zen lineage traces all the way back in India to Mahakasyapa receiving the transmission from the Buddha, and it occurred by the Buddha holding up a flower. I also had some inspiration for this because I moved my seat over here. I remember months and months ago, and I was sitting in the office giving a talk, and this is a plumeria plant behind me, and the plumeria had dropped all its leaves, and I had to spray it because I had a fungal infection. It almost died, but I treated it and put it away for the winter, and it came out this spring, and I looked up on top of the closet in the other room, and I saw it was growing leaves, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's back. Fantastic. And I remember Doug, you saying months ago you missed the plumeria. So this is for you, Doug. And it finally bloomed, and I think it's bloomed. It doesn't really do well in the mountains, and it's bloomed twice in about 12 years. So it's quite a celebration at the household there that the plumeria is in bloom. And I don't know if this is common with plumerias, but before even the whole flower head has bloomed, some of them are falling off. And then it's still blooming and they're falling. So you have this beautiful happening where flowers are blooming and flowers are falling at the same time. Which really, really says something about the impermanence and the change and the living and dying that we're all involved in. I see this with flowers right here. We have this big assemblage with the Buddha. The Buddha holds up a flower, and it said that half the people just got up and left. I guess it would have been like you go to see Taylor Swift on the Eras tour, and she just comes out and sits there for a bit, and he doesn't even bother plugging the amp in. And people are like, what? I dropped like, however much. And then they just get up and leave, and then they end up missing the whole show. The Buddha doesn't say anything. Some people leave, waiting for words, right? Waiting for the Buddha to explain it. But this is the heart of Zen, where the Buddha said this can't be transmitted. I can't transmit this enlightenment, but I can delineate a path to follow. And Mahakasyapa at this point has followed this path with diligence, and his own path of asceticism, which he kept up alongside apparently. So he's spent the hours on the cushion. He's meditated. He's followed the Buddha. He's been there for decades at this point. And so when the Buddha just holds up a flower, it said that everyone who hadn't left remained silent, and only Venerable Mahakasyapa, he smiles. And that's for transmission. And this is a koan in the Zen school. It's just like, what is transmitted? What did Mahakasyapa see? What does Mahakasyapa understand? And why does Mahakasyapa smile when the Buddha just raises a flower? If we understand that in a direct and simple sense, if we really, simple meaning that in a very positive way, right? Very simple, very direct. He holds up a flower. And Mahakasyapa smiles. You can imagine people what does that mean? What's the flower represent? What's hidden? What's the secret here? But Mahakasyapa isn't looking for secrets. He just sees the flower. And he smiles. I'm sure it was a beautiful flower. Flowers make us smile. Right? It's very nice to receive flowers. Or to give flowers. And yet, for this enlightenment, this absolute way that the Buddha talks about, Mahakasyapa had to practice for many years. Match minds with the Buddha. The Buddha had his unique path toward waking up, towards better understanding and being able to deal with this curious mystery of the human condition. The Buddha lived his life in his way. Mahakasyapa lived his life in his way. We are living our life our way. The Buddha said, I have the treasury of the true Dharma. Okay, so these are powerful resume statements from the Buddha. I have the treasury of the true Dharma, the marvelous mind of Nirvana, the true form of no form, and the subtle gate of the Dharma. You can imagine this on the Buddha's LinkedIn page. He has all of these things. Apparently, this is like, it sounds ever more clumsy when this gets translated into English from the Chinese, from the Pali, for how this comes out. It can sound really, over the top. I have the treasury eye of the true Dharma. But this is the Buddha saying, I understand, I see the Dharma, I understand this. There is confidence and surety there. The mind of Nirvana. The mind that is aligned with the fullness of this reality, that isn't looking for something else, moving towards something or moving away from anything, but is rooted in this life as it is. The true form of no form. That's a little, that sounds a little abstract. But this no form, this emptiness. Each one of us is clearly a form, and we're surrounded by forms, including the flowers and the cats and the pictures on the wall and and the fan and everything else. We see forms, the eye is drawn to forms. And yet at the root, all of these forms are empty of enduring, fixed, permanent nature. If we go along with Buddhist cosmology, we could say that, but we don't have to take Buddhist cosmology on. You could say, well, on the subatomic level, it's all electrons and particles in empty space. You know, you could just go there from science. Or we could go there by just seeing each other and looking in each other's eyes and seeing that beyond this appearance of form, there is undoubtedly a common root of awareness that we all share. But that awareness cannot be found, grasped, identified, or fixed. It has no form. This awareness has no form. But the Buddha says the true form of no form. What is that? You know? So if we say we have the root of no form, but we're appearing as form. This now is the true form and no form. This is form and emptiness. This is reality. This is our life. The Buddha was extraordinarily adept at settling this matter, understanding this. 2,500 years ago, in the plains of northern India, without the advantage or maybe disadvantage of scientific testing. But he tested, it was a different kind of scientific understanding. It was an understanding gleaned from the laboratory of lived experience that he could attest to. A thorough understanding of the human condition by navigating and enduring through all of the trials and tribulations, all of the pains and the sufferings, in order to truly understand his own nature. Mahakasyapa took a similar but different path. And now we imagine him sat on a hillside in India all those years ago, sat next to each other, known each other for long years, and the Buddha holds up a flower and says, and Mahakasyapa smiles. And the Buddha says then, now I entrust Mahakasyapa with this. And that's wonderful for the Buddha because, you know, somebody in his position wants a good successor. He wants a good successor, somebody he can entrust. Because the Dharma is a subtle subject. It is the most subtle of subjects, you could say. So to entrust that to someone without a clear understanding leads to the unraveling of it, of the teaching, typically. It said, you know, Dogen says somewhere that, Dogen said, the subtle Dharma of the Buddhas is rightly transmitted by an enlightened disciple following an enlightened master. This is beyond the knowledge of priests of letters and learning. This is Dogen talking in the 13th century, saying it's not about priests and dogma and letters and learning. It's someone who's awake, recognizing someone who's awake, and then continuing our best to share the practice of awakening. This is Dharma practice at its core. And we don't have to yearn or reach for the Buddha's enlightenment, or Mahakasyapa's enlightenment, or Dogen's enlightenment. Right? The work of our lives is to refine and deepen our own practice of realization, our own practice, the enlightenment we understand. We don't make it something special that's out there on a pedestal somewhere. But enlightenment means to shine the light, or better still, to allow the light to shine. We already are this light, this awareness. But that light is often, for the human condition, it's like light going into a prism with a few cracks in it. And that light gets distorted and bent out in different ways. when it runs into the conditioned human experience. When we practice meditation, you realize what is unconditioned and gain space and awareness around our own conditioning, which gives us agency and choice around how to go forward, living responsively rather than unconsciously and reactively. As simple and as beautiful and as profound as that, if we return and practice present awareness, that present awareness is what is transmitted in our lives to the world. We still live the human condition, and that's a difficult, it's not an easy role to live as a human being. And yet that's who we are. That's what we are, at least right now. So, our practice is to look at the reality of that without somebody between us and the experience, but our own responsibility to look at it for ourselves, to see what's there, to shine a light into the dark corners, and then to go forward leaning into good, leaning into the elimination of suffering, leaning toward benefit, leaning toward wholeness, leaning back to harmony and away from division, difficulty, and unnecessary separation. We're all involved in that, and that's what the community is, in our own family style. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and practice with you, because if I didn't have to show up at 4:30 this afternoon, I probably wouldn't have sat. In fact, I know I wouldn't have sat. I'd have done some other things. I got lots of things to do. They all seem very important. 101 things, right? And yet, if I give some time to the authentic practice of upright sitting and in community, it is easier to do so because you're buoyed by the efforts and energy of others. Then I know my life is underwritten by something powerful and enduring. Okay, I'm going to put it there, and thank you for your kind ears. And in the time that we have left here, I'd like to open it up to any question, any comment, anything that you would like to share, ask, or add. Please feel encouraged. Thank you all. I run over a couple of minutes here, so I should wrap things up. But a real pleasure to see your smiling faces. With look, I've got flowers everywhere today. Even the orchids are blooming. I hope you have a wonderful and restful evening. Good sleep tonight. Wonderful week ahead. On and on. Pleasure to see you.